Welcome. Welcome to our annual Holocaust Commemoration. I'm Sarah Bachman-Ducey, and I'm College-wide Chair for Integrative Studies and Peck Humanities Institute Director. I'm really glad you're here. Our annual commemorations began in 1998 with Dr. Myrna Goldenberg, the founding director for PPHI. I want you to know that Montgomery College is committed to teaching the Holocaust, and this commemoration is just a part of that work. We also offer the Portraits of Life, Holocaust Survivors of Montgomery County, the photographic exhibition, and Holocaust Survivors Speakers Bureau. We have the annual Bella Mishkinsky Lecture, and we do a variety of other programs on our campuses, in the community, across the year, and for diverse audiences. Tonight's is a solemn event, but it is not without beauty. During our candle lighting ceremony, you will meet Holocaust survivors from our region. We have poetry readings and music to make you think and to feel and to nourish your spirit. You will have the great honor of hearing witness testimony by Holocaust survivor Nat Shafir. Now, I'd like to thank the people who helped bring this evening to you. I do this at the front so that you can really think about the program, absorb it, reflect, and respond at the end without having me have to go through this whole list. But this event doesn't happen without a lot of help, and I think you'll know that as you work with us through this evening. The most important person to thank, actually, is Dr. Ken Jassy. He is the coordinator for Holocaust Education for Montgomery College. He is an amazing man, and he is committed to this work. He has worked with the Portraits of Life, Holocaust Survivors of Montgomery County program since 2005. You can do the math. He's invested, he's been doing this for a long time, and he cares so deeply. I want to thank Rustin, who works with us in the Campus Commons office. Nothing happens without Thank you, We have Holocaust survivors that have joined us tonight to share their evening. We have Dora Claymon and Manny Mandel and Helena Peabody, Rita Rubenstein, Nat Shafir, and Ayana Tuval. We have MC students. We have Andrew Anthony on violin, Viola Clune, and Ellie Sullivan reading poetry. I want to thank Dr. Dawn Avery and also Albert Kapikian. Dawn is the music director and Albert Kapikian is coordinator for the Potomac Review literary journal and the internship program that goes with that. We have a technical crew. You don't do this without a technical crew. And I'd like to thank Arkar, Pia Wynn, Stanley Jones, and also the closed captioning service, which makes this more accessible to more people. I have an important thank you to the senior leadership team here at Montgomery College. They stand behind us and they affirm our commitment to teaching the Holocaust. Tonight, you'll meet Dr. Carolyn Terry, Associate Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs. She is a strong and dear supporter of the PPHI, our mission, the people that work with us. She's been doing this for us and with us since our inception. She will lead the candle lighting ceremony tonight. Dr. Sanjay Rai is our Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs. He's our Chief Academic Officer. You'll meet him and you have a special treat as well. You'll meet Dr. Jermaine Williams, Montgomery College's brand new president. So thank you for joining us and taking the time to be with us. I'd like to introduce to you now, Dr. Sanjay Rai. Sanjay.
Thank you, Professor Ducey, for your invitation. And good evening, everyone. I'm so honored to welcome you to annual Holocaust Commemoration at Montgomery College. Each year, this event is a solemn reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable evil. Our purpose tonight is to recognize the strength and dignity of those who survived the terrible events of the Holocaust and to honor those who were lost by their names so they are not forgotten. Today, as news of war in Europe dominates headlines once again, our responsibility is to remind ourselves of the tragic human cost of organized greed and hate. Within our own country, we are seeing efforts to erase history and to silence the voices of victims of oppression. Montgomery College's Holocaust Commemoration represents our community's commitment to telling these stories so that we never forget. Now, it is my honor to introduce Montgomery College's president, Dr. Jermaine Williams, to offer some words of welcome. Dr. Williams began his tenure as the college's 11th president just yesterday, and we are so grateful that he is joining us this evening. Dr. Williams' work in higher education has focused on improving access for students, as well as on retention and graduation. He has paid special attention to mitigating social inequities for historically underrepresented people. Dr. Williams' view of higher education as a public good informs his personal passion about enhancing access, completion, and post-completion success, all of which are goals embraced across Montgomery College. Please welcome Dr. Williams.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Rai. And thank you for inviting me to join this ceremony. I'm so unbelievably honored to have been invited and so filled with emotion. An important part of higher education is teaching history. Teaching history so that we can avoid repeating its most tragic episodes. The Holocaust is obviously one of the darkest chapters in human history, which is why it is so important to remember it. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza wrote, "If you want the present to be different from the past, study the past." I understand that we're doing this in many classes at the college: history, literature, and political science, among others, and I know we will continue to do so. I want to express my sincerest appreciation for those who organized today's ceremony, particularly the Peck Humanities Institute, and to those of you in attendance today. We are grateful, so very grateful, to hear from Mr. Nathan Shafir for his willingness and appreciate his willingness to share his testimony today. Hearing the stories of those who lived through the Holocaust transforms us all into witnesses. Witnesses who then bear the responsibility to preserve these stories. So thank you all for your courage in this process. I hope that experiencing this in an educational setting allows us all to think deeply about the skills and tools we have as educators and students and community members to prevent atrocities in the future. Thank you again for the invitation. I'm extremely humbled.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carolyn Terry, and I have the honor of introducing each of the survivors who has joined us tonight. And we're going to have each survivor light their candle and then tell us a little bit about the people that they are honoring in memory at that candle lighting. So I will call each person individually, alphabetically, and of course, we can't see you at home. If you are lighting your candles, we welcome you to do that too, but we'll only be able to show the survivors who are with us on camera. So I'll first call upon Dora Clayman.
I lit this candle in memory of my parents, Solomon and Silva Bash, and the rest of my family, at least 10 members of my family, all of whom were killed in Croatia by Croatian collaborators at Ustasha during the Holocaust. It is a sad story that we are now experiencing another war, thinking about another war, and let this candle be in memory of those who have just fallen.
Thank you, Ms. Clayman. The next is Manny Mandel.
I light this candle in memory of my family, many of whom perished, and in memory of all those who cannot be here to light candles for others. I'm a survivor from Hungary who left Budapest in 1944 and had to travel through Bergen-Belsen until the end of the war, when I came here to this country in 1949.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Helena Peabody.
I lit my candle, first of all, for my mother. My mother was always the person first in my mind to honor, because she with her bare hands saved my sister and me. So the honor really goes to her. And also in memory of my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, and my cousins, so many that I didn't even get to meet. So thank you for letting me do this, and I appreciate it. And I really related for the 6 million who passed away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peabody. Rita Rubenstein.
I lit this candle in memory of my father, Avram David Lifshitz, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, and the 6 million and others who were brutally murdered. And I hope history will never repeat itself again. Never again.
Thank you, Ms. Rubenstein. Nat Shafir.
I lit this candle in memory of my extended family who perished during this Holocaust time. 32 members of my immediate family actually were murdered by the Nazis, some of them in concentration camps, some of them of starvation, some of them in the ovens of different camps. So in their memory, I like to light that candle.
Thank you, Mr. Shafir. Ayana Tuval.
I light this candle in memory of 70 members of my extended family that perished in Yugoslavia, killed by the Nazis and the Croatian collaborators. And I'm so sorry that nobody really doesn't learn the lessons of the Holocaust. Not enough, not enough. People don't learn enough.
And now we would like to turn our attention to some of our students who are participating in today's event. So first up, we have Viola Clune, who is going to do a reading for us.
Thank you. This is Chorus of the Saved, a poem by Nellie Sachs, translated by Catherine Summer. We who are saved, out of whose hollow bones death has already fashioned his flutes, on whose sinews death has already drawn his bow. Our bodies still complain with their crippled music. We who are saved still see the nooses looped for our necks, hanging in the blue air. Our dripping blood still fills the hourglass. We who are saved are still gnawed by worms of fear. Our star is buried in dust. We who are saved beg you, show us your sun, but slowly. Lead us step by step from star to star. Let us learn to live again, but softly. Otherwise, the song of a bird, the bucket filling at the well, might break open the weak seals of our pain and foam us away. We beg you, don't show us yet a dog that bites. We might crumble to dust before your eyes. What holds our web together, our breath is gone, our midnight, our souls fled to him, long before our bodies were saved in the arc of the moment. We who are saved hold your hand, we recognize your eyes, but only the farewell holds us together. The farewell in the dust keeps us together with you.
Good evening. I'm Professor Jassy, and I want to say a few words about our offerings in Holocaust education at Montgomery College. It has been my great honor for more than a dozen years to play a leading role in the program Portraits of Life, Holocaust Survivors of Montgomery County, Maryland. Portraits of Life is both an exhibition of nearly 40 panels depicting Holocaust survivors from the DC area, and which narrates some of their experiences during World War II. Portraits is also a speakers bureau with survivors providing firsthand testimony to complement the exhibition. Portraits of Life is part of the Paul Peck Humanities Institute, founded by Emeritus Professor Myrna Goldenberg, herself a Holocaust scholar, who also inaugurated MC's annual Holocaust Commemoration back in 1998. Professor Sarah Ducey, whom you heard from earlier, is the current director, and under her diligent efforts, the PPHI is thriving and branching out into various directions with student internships, Smithsonian faculty fellowships, digital storytelling, and much more. I've coordinated the portraits since 2005, as I think you heard. If you're interested at all in the program, and especially if you would like to have a survivor speak to your students, please get in touch with me. You can see my email on the screen. Portraits is, of course, an educational exhibition. It also works artistically as well. This photo comes from the Sarah Silberman Art Gallery in the art building on the Rockville campus. It was taken in 2018 when there was a exhibition of the entire collection. The exhibition has been, above all, exhibited in schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, government buildings, federal, state, and county, libraries, cultural centers, places of worship, etc. Thousands of people have been a part of this educational experience and no doubt influenced by it, including 2 schools, one private and one public, in the past couple of weeks. I received an email the other day from a parent who visited a partial exhibition of portraits with her daughter, and who wrote to me that the exhibition was just right for starting some of these difficult conversations about quite a complicated past. And she was referring specifically to the complicated history of Austria during World War II. The most fulfilling part of this job, I don't want to call it a job, but is working with survivors. Sadly, a diminishing resource, as Manny Mendel, who you saw earlier, has wryly noted. I cannot speak highly enough of their decency and their commitment to speak about a terrifying past without bitterness or rancor or hatred, so that the present generation can know the truth about what happened, and knowing that can stand fast, hopefully, against prejudice and discrimination and calls to violent acts, to violent actions. These are just a few of my role models and friends that I have gotten to know over the years, and their portraits. I could talk about this meaningful program for much, much longer, but I won't. Again, you know how to reach me if you have any questions. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our main speaker, briefly, so we will have time to talk about his history. Mr. Nat Shafir is a Holocaust survivor from Romania. The persecution and murder of Romanian Jews is not that well known, especially as that country was allied to and not conquered by Nazi Germany. The killing of more than 200,000 Romanian Jews was largely the work of the Romanian fascist regime and its supporters, who decimated many thriving communities. Nat will discuss his experiences and that of his family before, during, and after the war as time permits. He currently volunteers at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and aids in the educational efforts to teach people about the Holocaust that's a part of that institution. So let me turn it over to Nat, and I will bring up his PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you very much. My parents were born in the eastern part of Hungary. My mother was the oldest of 12 children, and my father was the youngest of 7. In 1924, about a year after World War I ended, my father and 2 of his older brothers decided to move to Romania, close to the big city of Iași. As you can see, it's on the northeast part of Romania, where they settled in a farm community called Bucium, where they established a large dairy farm. Before long, they became very successful. That was due to the fact that their biggest customer was the Romanian army. They lived in harmony with other Gentile farmers. We had both Jewish friends and non-Jewish friends. The community of Bucium was approximately 100 different families. 75% of these families were Christians and 25% were Jewish. A few years later, my father, who was the bachelor among the 3 brothers, decided it's time for him to get married. The most logical place to find a bride on those days was for someone to go back to the town one came from, where he knows people and where people knew him. So he went back to Hungary, found a girl, and in 1930, he married, stayed in town, in the village rather, for a few more days, and then they boarded a train towards Romania. It's important to know that this was my mother's first time on a train and first time outside her village. She was only 16 when she married my father. They arrived in Bucium, and before long, 3 children were born, 2 girls and a boy, and I'm that boy. He lived on that farm, as I mentioned, in peace and harmony with all the Gentile farmers. Growing up on a farm as a young child was great, with open spaces, nature, animals. It was a primitive life, but it was a great life. I went to kindergarten. I started first grade. One of our neighbors was the priest of the town. That priest used to come by once a week and ask my father for a donation to the church and also for some dairy products for some of their parishioners who could not otherwise afford it. In 18 years that my father lived in that community, never once has he refused such a request. One day in November 1942, the same priest showed up. However, this time he came with a police officer and 2 armed soldiers. This never happened before, so we all came out to find out what was going on. When we came close to the group, the priest turned to the police officer and pointing at us, he said, "Estes Gitans, these are Jews." So we were turned into authority by a priest. The same priest who for 18 years asked and received every week help from my father. A few minutes later, the police officer told us that we have 4 hours to vacate the farm. Both my parents tried to reason with him. My father told them, "Listen, I've known you since you were a little child. I know your family. Can't you do to forget these orders?" My mother begged with him, and after a while, they realized it's not going to change his mind. He told us, "You can pack some valuables that you want, but in 4 hours, we had to leave." So we went back into the house and we tried to find exactly what do we take? We have 4 hours to take. What do we take? Okay, here we have is my mother on the right-hand side with her sister. By the way, she's the one that actually perished in Auschwitz. Myself, young little boy, and my older sister. My mother was pregnant at the time. So they realized, what do we pack in 4 hours? So the first thing we did, we took whatever cash we had in the house, my mother's jewelry, 2 candlesticks that my mother lit candles every Friday night. And then we took some Bibles and prayer books. And the same token, we realized exactly at this point where we were going, because in 1941, a ghetto was established in the outskirts of Iași called the Sokola Ghetto. After the 4 hours were over, the police officer told us the time for us to leave, and we were escorted to the ghetto of Iași. Once we arrived at the ghetto, as you can see and hear, a lot of different people arriving the same day. Many people arrived today from the surrounding towns and villages of Yash. We were turned over to the authority, and what they did, they took our names, our ages, and our gender down, and we were given a yellow star that we had to wear constantly on our breast pocket. We were given ration cards for bread and kerosene. We were also given as living quarters, one room in a house that already housed 4 other families. So it was pretty crowded. It was chaos in that ghetto because a lot of children were screaming, women were crying, men kind of were didn't know where they were going to. So there was really a lot of chaos in there. They also told us, number one, Jewish children could no longer go to school, and every man between the ages of 18 and 50 was assigned manual jobs. My mother's job was in a hospital as an orderly to scrub floors and clean toilets. My father's job was to sweep the floors on the city, and also on Thursdays, they actually had to clean the farmers market because Thursday was the market day for the city of Yash. We received a quarter of a loaf of bread every 2 days per person. To receive these rations, we had to walk outside the ghetto. This was actually the housing unit that we were assigned to live in, and was one room in the house that already housed 4 other families. Then we lined up at the bakery outside the ghetto, lined up in the bakery to get our rations. Now at that point, my father told my older sister to get the bread rations. My sister was 2 years older than me. Until one day, my father found out that some hooligans are picking on Jewish girls. And from that day on, he told me to go to get the bread rations. Keep in mind that the same hooligans who picked on Jewish girls also picked on Jewish boys. Many times I would come back home with a bloody face, all beaten up, but that never hurt as much as when these hooligans also stole my bread, which meant for the next 2 days we had nothing to eat. When my mother realized the first time what had happened, she also realized that this could happen again. So from that point on, she rationed us from our own rations. So we got our next ration of the quarter of a loaf of bread. She removed 1 slice. Next time she removed another slice. She had 2 slices until she accumulated an entire loaf of bread, which meant when these hooligans took away my bread, at least we had something to eat. One day, when my father was cleaning the market area, an old farmer who my father knew and helped a lot in the past. As you can see, this is the market area where the farmers would bring their goods to sell. So that old farmer came over to my father and said, "I'm really sorry to see you in this condition. I know you were good people. You helped us, a lot of us, many times. And here you are, you're cleaning after my horse manure. Really breaks my heart. Is there anything I can do to help?" And my father said some extra food would help a lot. So he said, "I'll try and see what can be done." The next Thursday, when he came back to the farmer's market, he told my father that a few of the farmers in Bushroom got together and they agreed to help. Keep in mind that helping Jewish people at that time was against the law, and people who were helping Jewish people could have been punished very harshly. But nonetheless, they decided to help us. And he said, "There's one way we can do that, because we could not actually bring it to the market and give it to him." So he said, every Wednesday, all the farmers from the surrounding areas do gather together in an open field. And at midnight on Wednesday night, they all leave for the market with our goods. That caravan that comes through from this big field passes the outskirts of the ghetto between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. He told my father to be outside the ghetto in a certain spot where this caravan passes by between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, also it's important to know that anybody caught outside the ghetto between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning would be harshly punished, probably imprisoned, or even probably shot. But my father decided to go out and risk his life for a little bit of extra food that perhaps we will survive a little longer. So Thursday came. He went out and meet this caravan, and was looking for the 3 wagons that the farmers told him to look out for. Before long, his caravans came forward, and he watched out for the last 3 wagons. When he saw these 3 wagons, they stopped. They looked around and they threw a sack or a bag in his direction where he was hiding. My father waited for a little bit until the caravan left, looked around to make sure there's no police around that saw this, picked up that sack and went back to the ghetto. That morning, when we all found out what had happened, my mother was very upset with him because she realized he risked his life by going outside the ghetto. But then when my father took out some eggs and some apples and some cheese, and she saw the smile of our faces, she realized at that point, she mellowed, and she realized what he did is actually not a selfish reasons, but he did it so our family can survive a little longer. From that time on, he actually went out every Thursday to wait for these farmers and get some extra food. Now, like every other ghetto, this ghetto had an open black market, active black market. And sometimes he would take in whatever these farmers were giving us and trade for something else. My father always took me along to the black market area. Why? Because if an elderly person was caught with some contraband, he would be harshly punished. If a child would be caught with some contraband, he would be slapped around a couple of times and then let go. So I always went with my father to the area where we were trading. Then went on for a while. One day in May of 1943, was waiting for the caravan and the farmers never stopped. They kept going. So my father realized there's something wrong. When he saw this farmer in the market area, the farmer told him he can no longer help us because there were some individuals in the community who told the police that some of the farmers are helping Jewish people. And for himself, he wouldn't worry as much, but he worries for his family. And he's very afraid that something happened to his family. So my father told him he very much appreciated all these months that he helped us, and he understood. Then one day in June of 1943, a big sign was posted in the ghetto that every man between the ages of 18 and 50 must assemble or must report to the ghetto square and bring some extra clothing because they will be shipped out to a different area to work. The day that he was supposed to report to the ghetto square, I asked my father if I can walk with him to where he was supposed to assemble, and he agreed. We were walking together, and then he said to me, Nat, things will get worse before they get better, but never give up. And he kept repeating that, never give up. And I remember these words many, many times during harsh times and very difficult times for me, both during my lifetime and also during the time in the ghetto. We kept walking, and once we got close to the assembled area, he turned around, he said to me, Nat, it's time for you to go back. At that time, he put both his hands on my shoulder, and he said 5 words to me that I will remember the rest of my life. He said, Nat, take care of the girls. I could have said, I'll try, or I'll do my best. But instead, I said, I'll take care of the girls, Papa, I will. I was not yet 8 years old. You can't imagine the weight of these 5 words that I had to carry on my shoulders. It was very difficult for me. Once my father was away, many times I was ready to give up. I always remembered what my father said, never give up. Things like this, every day we run into what we call the mode of being every day, being the same thing. So the survival mode, that took for a while. Then approximately the end of July of 1944, the city of Charge was bombed. Every 2 nights, every 3rd night, and then in the beginning of August to the middle of August, the city was bombed constantly. Then at the end of August 1944, we were liberated by the Russians. We never heard from my father this entire 14 months since he went away in June of 1943. Later, we found out that he was sent on the border of Moldova and Ukraine. He was laying railroad tracks so to continue the railroads between Germany all the way to the Russian front. This is an area of in Moldova on the border of Ukraine, where you can see the individuals breaking up rocks and laying railroad tracks. It was very hard labor. Many died there of starvation, many died there of exhaustion. So this was where my father was sent out to. We never heard from my father his entire 14 months. Then finally, in the spring of 1945, we reunited with my father. He survived and he came back. But a week after he came back, he told me, Nat, it's time for us to go back to the farm to set everything up to make sure that we can bring the family back. And we set off to go to the farm. And then he also told me that before we go to the farm, let's stop at that old farmer who helped us with extra food all these months. So we stopped at this farmer. He was very happy to see us. He invited us to a meal. And after we finished the meal, he asked us, where are we going from here? And my father told him that we're going back to our farm. He said, I wouldn't do that because that farm no longer belongs to you. That farm was divided into 3 sections. The priest and his family received 1 section. That's the same priest who turned us into the authorities. The police officers who told us that we have 4 hours to vacate the farm received another section. And the individuals who ran that little town like a mayor received the third section. My father took his advice and he never went back. This took a while. Things did not get any better. We are now under the communist rules. The Russians took over all the duties of the individuals, and things were not any better. We were able to go back to school, but there was a lot of anti-Semitism because of the Russians. So in 1947, my father decided that it's no longer feasible for us to stay in Romania. It's no longer an option for us. So we decided to leave. And at that time, the only place we can go was Palestine. So we applied for a visa to go to Palestine. A few months later, we received a reply with a denied. We kept applying for a visa to go to Palestine. Finally, about 2 years later almost, my mother was able to bribe the chief of police of Yash, and we got the visa, and we finally arrived in Israel in April of 1950. In the meantime, all my extended family who remained in Hungary actually were caught in Hungary and around Budapest and also in Transylvania. We know from history that Hungary was invaded by the Germans in March of 1944. They immediately started to deport people primarily to Auschwitz. Between April and July of 1944, 440,000 Jews were deported. Among these 440,000 Jews were 33 members of my extended family, my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins. They're all deported. The young ones and the old ones were immediately put to death in the gas chambers. Those who were able to work were shipped to some different camps. Some of them, but most of them died. We don't know where, when, or how. We only know the fate of 3 individuals, my grandfather and 2 of my uncles. Both remained in Auschwitz. My grandfather died of starvation a month before he was liberated. 2 of my uncles survived the liberation. One was 21 years old and one was 22 years old. Each one weighed 65 pounds. You can imagine what they looked like. When the Red Cross came into these camps and they saw the conditions these people were in, they put them on ships and they ferried them to Sweden, which was a neutral country at the time. Unfortunately, one of these uncles did not make it to Sweden. He died on the way and he was buried at sea. And from all these 33 members of my extended family, only 1 survived, and that's my Uncle Lazar. These are the Russians that actually liberated us. So this is my Uncle Lazar, who was the only one that survived. He was in the hospital and sanatorium for 4 years to gain his weight and his health back. So from 33 members of my extended family, only 1 person survived, and that's Uncle Lazar. That Uncle Lazar actually came to visit one time in Israel when we arrived in April of 1950, and he told me stories about the United States, about America, and how great it was. and I fell in love with America. So I asked him I'd like to come and visit him. So he was the one that actually sponsored me to come to the United States. I stayed in Israel until 1963 after serving in a fighting unit in the Israeli army for 3 years. Then I came to the United States in 1961. I got married. I had 5 children and 12 grandchildren who were all named after some individuals who were murdered by the Nazis. I know that's kind of hard to put everything into a half an hour to explain everything what happened to me during that period of time, but this in general what happened for a little bit of time that I have to share with you what happened to me and to my extended family. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nat. It means a lot to hear your testimony. It speaks to the importance of family members relying on each other and giving each other strength. And also it speaks to the importance of vigilance, that is maintaining vigilance if we wish to preserve our freedoms and way of life against murderous regimes like the Nazis. As this event is a commemoration, a solemn occasion, we do not take questions. Normally we have survivors speak, we take questions, but we would certainly welcome and would like to hear your thoughts and comments in a survey that will become available by the end of the program. The next part of the program will involve live music performed by a student, an MC student, Mr. Andrew Anthony, who will play some Romanian folk music compiled by the early 20th century composer Bela Bartok. Thank you, Andrew. That was wonderful, very moving. I want to take this time now to honor those portraits of life participants, far too many who are no longer with us. So I want to state the names of the people who I've worked with over the years, who are no longer with us and whom we could say now are of blessed memory. And I will briefly state their names, as well as show a picture of these wonderful people, some of whom I knew very well, others only slightly, but all were pillars of the community. And this is sort of the emotional part of the program, so I'll try to keep it together. Fanny Eisenberg, Bella Mishkinsky-Bermanis and Irene Glassberg, Eva Blumberg, Beatrice Carasso, Isaac and Yona Dickmann, Erika Eckstut, Eva Ehrlich, Manya Friedman, Fritz Gluckstein, Hannah Green, Henry Greenbaum, Yuda Levy and Ruth Horwitz, Rosette Koenig, Velik and Hinta Luxembourg, Peter Masters, Leon and Nina Merrick, Eugene Miller, Charlene Schief, Esther Sendrovich, Flora Singer, Regina and Sam Spiegel, Harriet Steinhorn Roth, Herman Taub, and Freddie Traum.
A second poem by Nellie Sachs, Chorus of the Stones. We stones, when someone lifts us, he lifts the foretime. When someone lifts us, he lifts the Garden of Eden. When someone lifts us, he lifts the knowledge of Adam and Eve and the serpent's dust-eating seduction. When someone lifts us, he lifts in his hand millions of memories which do not dissolve in blood like evening. For we are memorial stones, embracing all dying. And we have some final words from renowned Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. Forgetting someone. Forgetting someone is like forgetting to turn off the light in the backyard so it stays lit all the next day. But then it is the light that makes you remember.
I'd like to thank you all for being with us this evening to commemorate both those who were lost and those who survived the Holocaust. Thank you for being with us, for thinking about this, for caring, and for carrying the testimony forward. Good evening.